Now, this image is totally fake and never happened. But what's not fake is wondering, where do our two U.S. Senate candidates here in Ohio, Sherrod Brown and Jon Husted, stand on LGBTQ plus issues? So before I can break this down between our two candidates, we got to get on the same page with all these letters. I'm not going to walk through all of these, so pause the video if you need to read through them to understand. Also know that in the video description, I have links to these definitions as well. Because I am a human, and therefore sometimes prone to oversimplifying things, I'm going to refer to the entire contents of this umbrella here as queer. But if I mean a particular identity in particular, I will say the particular word. Otherwise, queer is going to be our stand-in word for the pride umbrella here. Okay, so let's break down what our two candidates have said and done in regards to queer people. There's lots of different issues, but let's focus on the things that seem to come up the most that I hear about here in Ohio. And I'm going to use the terms that I hear the most out there in the wilds of Ohio. This is a big table we're going to be filling in, right? There's a lot of jelly in these donuts. This means that there's going to be oodles of links in the video description to all sorts of information about every one of these topics so that you can look more closely into all of them, because unfortunately, children, this is not a semester-long class, and I'm going to fly over these each in an overview generality kind of way. So we're going to start with gay marriage. So this is more commonly or more formally known as same-sex marriage or marriage equality. So this is the legal, social, or religious union of two people of the same sex or gender identity. And it gives same-sex couples the exact same legal rights, responsibilities, protections, and financial benefits that are traditionally given to opposite-sex married couples. All right, starting with Sherrod Brown, he's a pretty solid thumbs up on gay marriage. In 1996, he voted no for the Defense of Marriage Act. And this was to define marriage as exclusively between a man and a woman. And note, at that time in 1996, this was a controversial move, and it required some bravery because even among Democrats, most Democrats voted yes to make marriage only between a man and a woman. But Sherrod Brown voted no. In 2022, Sherrod Brown voted yes for the Respect for Marriage Act, which gives federal protections for same-sex and interracial marriages. And this ensures that states must recognize valid marriage performed in other states. And Sherrod Brown has been pretty consistent in saying that gay marriage is a matter of civil rights and historical progress. Okay. So flipping over to Jon Husted, he does not seem to be too vocal on this issue and tends to go along Republican Party lines. And to be fair, most queer issues, he doesn't seem to have a lot to say about them. He just seems to mostly go along with Republican Party lines. And so in 2003, in the Ohio State House, Jon Husted voted yes on the Defense of Marriage Act. And again, that defines marriage as between a man and a woman. So Jon Husted voted yes on that. In 2013, there was this little national headline thingy that came up, which was Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman reversed his stance and was then going to start supporting gay marriage. And so reporters asked Jon Husted, what do you say or what do you think about Senator Rob Portman supporting gay marriage now? And Jon Husted said that Portman is a, quote, good father, but he wouldn't say his own position on the matter. Okay. So next up is same-sex adoption. And so this is the same as heterosexual adoption, except it's a same-sex couple or an individual queer person who is going through the process of legally adopting a child and then having all the legal parental rights and obligations as parents do, right? So Sherrod Brown voted against prohibiting same-sex couples from adopting. So because that's sort of a double negative, what that means is he's giving a thumbs up to same-sex couples adopting. Sounds good to him. Jon Husted has been actually very practical on this issue. And the first thing he tends to do is question what is best for the child. And then as Speaker of the Ohio House, Jon Husted actually broke from the Republican Party and opposed a bill that bans same-sex adoption. So Jon Husted is also giving a thumbs up on same-sex adoption. So given that both of our Senate candidates appear to support same-sex adoption, I feel a little bit at liberty to add that the data has shown that children raised by same-sex couples are no more or less likely to be queer than children raised by heterosexual couples. They are also just as likely or unlikely, whatever, to have successful careers. So it seems like kids raised by same-sex couples are just as likely to be awesome or totally messed up as the kids raised by heterosexual couples. Next up are trans athletes. So trans athletes are transgender people who are athletes who participate in sports whose gender identity right now differs from the biological sex that they were assigned at birth. So this can include transgender women. So these are people who were assigned male at birth who now identify as female. This can be transgender men, people assigned female at birth who now identify as male, and non-binary or gender-diverse people who don't really fit into any traditional category. So Sherrod Brown opposes bans on trans participation in sports, meaning he's okay with trans people being in sports. But there's like an asterisk on this. It's notable because it actually was him saying that schools who allow trans athletes should not lose school funding. So he rather doesn't offer an opinion other than to say that schools need to be funded and they can decide for themselves what to do about trans athletes. Jon Husted has said that, quote, men should not compete in women's sports. And he's also said, I hope that the SAFE Act will become law in Ohio. So in the video description, I have links to what the SAFE Act is. Also, as a U.S. Senator in 2026, he supported amendments to legislation that would have blocked transgender athletes from participating in women's sports. So he very much does not want trans athletes in sports, and he would like legislation that blocks transgender athletes from being in sports. Next up, we have trans bathrooms. So bathroom bills are mandates and legislations that individuals use public bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing spaces that align very strictly with their biological sex rather than their gender identity. Sherrod Brown opposes bans on transgendered public accommodations. So as I read this, he supports transgendered people using the bathroom that aligns with their gender right now. Jon Husted supports bans on restrictive bathroom and locker room policies in schools. So next up is medical care for transgendered people who are minors. So minors are under 18 years old. And medical care, I don't mean like flu and COVID shots and checkups. We mean here gender-affirming care. So this might be puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries for people whose gender does not align with what their biological born sex was. Okay, so Sherrod Brown has very consistently maintained that healthcare decisions should remain between patients, their families, and their doctors, and not politicians. So in 2023, he urged the Biden administration to protect and ensure access to gender-affirming care, particularly for those in states where such care has been restricted. So, and some of these are so nuancy, you know? So he's not saying, hey, if there is a transgendered kid in school, they should immediately go get surgery. He's not saying that. He's saying he doesn't want government interference in private healthcare decisions. Jon Husted has said, and I will give you a quote here, permanent medical decisions concerning gender should not be made when you are a child. So he's saying, it's quite in contrast to Sherrod Brown. He's saying, I don't think the decisions here should be between patients, their families, and their doctors. I do want politicians to make this choice, and I want the choice to be no. If you are under 18, you shouldn't be doing any gender-affirming care. So no hormones, no puberty blockers, no surgeries, nothing. He has also said, and I quote, that we need to protect children from life-changing transgendered surgeries. So moving on, now we're going to talk about medical care for transgendered people who are adults. So these would be people who are over 18 years old. And by medical care, again, we're not talking about flu and COVID vaccines and regular checkups. We are talking about perhaps hormone therapy for adults who are transgender. And this is also concerning access for adults to state-funded insurance like Medicaid, or access to nurse practitioners and doctors who will prescribe hormone therapies. Sherrod Brown voted against a 2022 amendment that would have excluded transgender pregnant people from maternal and infant-related federal programs. So what that means is, whatever gender you identify with, if you're pregnant, you should be able to get like maternal and infant-related federal program care, is what he's saying. And he also wants to legally protect transgender adults from being denied medical treatment, prescriptions, or insurance coverage based on their gender identity. So here again, he seems to want to protect the ability of a patient and a doctor to decide what a patient should do, have, get, or not, right? And then again, the first part of that is, however you identify, if you're pregnant, Sherrod Brown thinks you should get maternal and infant-related care. And so then shifting to Jon Husted, he supports state-level initiatives, such as Ohio House Bill 838, which aim to completely ban Medicaid and state employee health care plans from covering gender reassignment surgery, hormone treatments, or other related treatments for adults. So with transgender medical care for minors, he seemed to not want children to make permanent big decisions when they're still under 18. And then for people who are over 18, he's saying, do whatever you want, but it is not going to be on state funding in any way, is how I'm taking this. Okay, so for these last two things, we're talking about children in school, kindergarten through 12th grade. This first one is queer book banning, which are bans and challenges to library books that feature queer characters or themes. I'll be making a separate video about libraries coming up, and so I'll probably touch on this issue again. And I'm sorry, this one's a little big. Sherrod Brown signed on as a co-sponsor to Senate Resolution 372, which formally condemns the, quote, spreading problem of book banning that threatens freedom of expression in the United States. So the resolution specifically defends the right of students to access a diverse array of books reflecting different identities, including queer and minority perspectives. Sherrod Brown has frequently spoken out, asserting that students deserve to see themselves represented in literature and to feel valued. And he argues that state-level book bans and book restrictions make an environment that is hostile. It just necessarily does, because you're banning queer books, and so he's saying you're creating an environment that's hostile, and you're creating censorship that hinders and gets in the way of kids' intellectual growth. In the Senate, Sherrod Brown has voted against different amendments that have all in different ways sought to strip federal education money from school districts that maintain books with queer themes or sex education materials in their libraries. And so again, kind of like the transgendered athletes, this feels a bit like Sherrod Brown is saying school districts and schools need to decide some things for themselves in these arenas, and these schools, because they're schools, should keep getting funded because we need schools. And if I can put words in his mouth, which I will, but he's not said this, but he appears to support the quote by the author of Dear God, It's Me, Margaret, Judy Blume. And she says, let children read whatever they want and then talk about it with them. And that seems to maybe align with what Sherrod Brown is thinking here. And then we're going to flip over to Jon Husted. And so he supports the Parents' Bill of Rights. He very strongly, so this is Ohio's House Bill 8, and he very strongly supported this. And it requires schools to notify parents about any curriculum or library materials that contain, quote, sexuality content or, quote, gender ideology. The Parents' Bill of Rights also allows parents to opt their children out of such material. Jon Husted has supported removing or restricting certain queer books, and he said, it's not a ban, but rather an effort to shield children from sexually explicit or age-inappropriate concepts. And Jon Husted has supported provisions within House Bill 96 that seeks to segregate materials related to sexual orientation or gender expression in public and school libraries, so they're kept entirely out of sight from anyone who's under the age of 18. So this might be like a separate room or a separate shelf that is totally covered or away, so that any books related to sexual orientation or gender expression are totally out of sight of anyone who's under the age of 18 in public or school libraries. And our last issue is going to be kindergarten through 12th grade school, quote, forced outing. So forced outing are laws that require educators to notify parents if a student is requesting to change their name or their pronouns at school. So Sherrod Brown opposes forced outing policies, and he opposes them because he says, not all homes are safe or supported for queer youth. And he echoes the concerns of child welfare advocates who argue that, automatically disclosing a student's gender identity or sexual orientation or pronouns without that student's consent can lead to family rejection, psychological trauma, physical abuse. And more specifically, Sherrod Brown supports allowing trained school counselors and educators to use their professional discretion. And so from this perspective, school staff should work collaboratively with students to sort of navigate family dynamics rather than being forced by state law to make an immediate mandatory disclosure. And so quite in contrast, Jon Husted championed Ohio House Bill 8. And under this state law, public school teachers, counselors, social workers, psychologists are legally required to promptly notify a parent of any change to a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. And the law very explicitly includes requirements to alert parents if a student requests recognition for a gender identity that differs from their biological sex. So part of this Ohio Bill 8 seems like something most people might agree on, which is school teachers and counselors, if a student is suddenly mentally, emotionally, or physically having a big problem and no longer are having good well-being, that they should notify parents. But this other part is the part that people will disagree on, and this is including requirements that parents need to be promptly alerted if a student requests different pronouns than what they were born with. Okay, that wasn't so long. That wasn't so bad, baby. I'm going to leave this table on the screen for a minute so you can stare at it and think about it. In the meantime, I will also say for all of these issues, I have lots of links in the video description, definitions of these things, federal and Ohio laws on these things, and some clips like video clips and articles about Sherrod Brown and Jon Husted and how they've responded to or supported or opposed different queer issues. Also, as I always do in the video description, there are lots of links to Ohio voting information, voting registration, important voting dates, and all that good stuff. Because, come on, dudes, you got to be sure that you're registered to vote, and you got to get your vote on the right day.